my body is finished. I'm doing a cropped version and this is size 5. I'm going to work the sleeves in this opening. Since this is size 5, you have a straight bit at the armholes and then you have a little curvature here for shaping the underarm. Size 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 will have a chain in the middle. Size 5 does not, nor does the other ones at the bottom. And I think it's only size 1 and 2 that don't have any of this curvature. So while I'm doing my sleeve, I will tell you about the differences between this size and the whatever it is that you're making. All right, so first thing you need to do is identify where you're going to be joining the yarn. So this is my first row of the body, and this gray one is going to be my last one of the top part of the garment. So this purple one, since this is where I joined my front and my back, I have like an opening there, and this purple one, that's where I'm going to attach it. So most sizes will have increased right there. So we're going to go and attach our yarn right here. I'm going to be using this green for my sleeve. I'm using a 4mm hook. I used a 5mm for the body, but on the sleeves we're going to use a smaller hook, okay, to make it nice and even. And then since I am working size 5, I'm going to work at a rate of 1 stitch per row on this diagonal section. So on my case, it's going to be 9 stitches. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, and 9. So you can see I started increasing in that yellow row. So that's where my last stitch is going to be, and that's where I'm going to place a marker. Okay, so there you go. I've done those 9 stitches, and that one's going to stay right there for now. And now I'm going to continue working upwards along the diagonal, but I'm going to do it at a rate of 4 stitches on every 5 rows, which means single crochet 3 and then single crochet 2 together. Okay, now if you are making size 1 and 2, you're not going to be making this diagonal section because you don't have that diagonal section, which means that you're just going to start working on the vertical side, which at a rate of 4 stitches on every 5 rows. If you are making sizes 6, 7, 8, and 9, right here you're going to have a flat bit of underarm, but you should still be attaching on the same place and working your diagonal section just like I am doing right now. Okay, so for working 4 stitches on every 5 rows, we're going to do 1, 2, and 3 stitches, and then single crochet 2 together, 1 and 2. So that is 4 stitches covering 5 rows. And that is to make up for the difference in gauge in row height for the body and sleeve stitches. So you're going to do all of that around until you reach your next diagonal section, which should be for me 9 stitches or 9 rows from the end. So 1 purple, 2 gray, then 2 green, yellow, 2 gray, and 2 yellow. So 2, 4, 6, 8, y 9, 9 rows, which will give me 9 stitches. Okay, I've just gone all the way around and finished my last stitch before my last 9 rows, so including the setup row for the body. Okay, don't forget that. So now I'm going to work my 9 stitches. Again, I'm doing size 5. If you're making a different size, then you'll either have a different amount of stitches or no stitches at all, because if you're working size 1 or 2, then at the bottom of the vertical side you will be at the end of your round. So here is my sleeve. I put it sideways so you can see it. Now, again, because I'm working size 5, I have 9 stitches from the beginning of my row to my marker, and then 9 stitches from the marker to the end of the row. Okay, if you're working size 1 and 2, you won't have this diagonal section, which means that at the end of your vertical section, you're simply going to join the round. Size 3, 4, and 5, you're going to join your round here with a slip stitch, and then you're going to fasten enough and cut your yarn. So this is going to be my setup row or round for the sizes 3, 4, and 5. If you're working sizes 6, 7, and 8, you are not going to join the round, because in between the beginning and the end of this setup row, you will have your underarm. So you will leave the underarm unworked and you will not join. You'll simply have the beginning and the end of the row separate, and it will still work the sleeve cap the same way. Now, why are we working a sleeve cap? If you're working size 1 and 2, you don't have this shaping, which means that your sleeve will just come out straight. But for the other larger sizes, because we have this shaping so that our shoulder drops at the same place for every single size throughout, I'm trying to be very size exclusive with this design, that because we have the shaping, if we simply start working the sleeve in the round, here your sleeve is going to be very, very wide because you will be including these stitches, and it will fold in a funny way because you'll have extra fabric that we don't need. So what we're going to do is going to start here, and we're going to work on the vertical side and back on the other end of the row. Here we're going to kind of incorporate some of these side stitches. We're going to go back, incorporate side stitches, go back, incorporate side stitches, and we're going to do this over and over again until we have incorporated all of these diagonal stitches into our sleeve cap. And once we have done that, our sleeve will be at this point for me, and it will not have as many stitches as if I had just worked it in the round right now, and there will be no bulging and it will look so much better. All right, and then from then we're just gonna simply work the sleeve straight in the round. All right, so where are we going to attach our yarn? Now that we have done our setup round or row for sizes 3 and 4, if you're size 1 and 2, you can move on to rest of sleeve, so you don't have to watch this, just skip ahead. But since you are, if you're 3 to 9, then we're going to do this part. So we're going to attach the yarn to the first marked stitch on the right side and remove the marker. So this is my beginning of row of round, and this is my first marked stitch. So I'm going to remove this marker. So I'm going to attach it right here, and I'm going to chain 1. We're going to skip the stitch where I have just attached the yarn and go to the next one, and I'm going to do an increase on that first stitch, which is 2 single crochets, right? Okay, so this first stitch, the one where my finger is, that's where the yarn was attached, and that's where the marker was, and now there's no marker, but this stitch has been used because that's where I attached the yarn. And then I'm going to simply single crochet until 1 stitch before the next marker. So here is my marked stitch, and I'm going to stop 1 before it. And then we're going to do 2 single crochets in the stitch before the marker, and I'm going to slip stitch in the marked stitch, which is that next stitch, and 1 more. And then I'm going to turn, leaving the last, for me, 7 stitches, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, unworked. So now I'm going to go back to the top. So how do you know how many you have unworked? Now for me, the marker is the joint of the round. So you see these stitches that are in front of that joint, that's the stitches that count. The slip stitch where you fastened off doesn't count as a stitch, all right? So make sure you don't count that. And same goes for the other end of the row, the beginning. I'll show you when we get there so that you can identify those stitches. I'm going to skip both slip stitches on the body, so 1, 2, and then I'm going to single crochet to the end of the row until the first single crochet from the previous row. Now if I see here, this is my first stitch of the row. That first single crochet, that's going to be the first stitch of the row, and I'm going not the slip stitches that we did. We are forgetting we have skipped those, so those are not counted anymore as first single crochet from the previous row. And then I'm going to skip the stitch where the yarn was attached, which as you can see is right there. This is where my yarn was attached. So I'm going to skip that one, and I'm going to slip stitch in the following 2 stitches of that setup row or round. Okay, and then I'm going to turn and do the same thing again on the other side. I'm going to skip the 2 slip stitches. I'm going to work in the next stitch, but now instead of doing just 1 single crochet on that stitch, I'm going to make 2 in that same stitch. So as you see, on all right side rows, I'm going to increase. On wrong side rows, I will not be increasing. I will just work single crochet on all stitches, but right side row, you can see it's right side because my charts are the right. The body, you can see it's on the right side. Then those I will increase. And if you think it's hard to identify that first stitch of the row when you get to it, just place a marker there to help you remember exactly where you need to stop. So I'm going to single crochet now all the way until 1 stitch before the end of the row. So this is my first stitch of the previous row, and I'm going to make 2 stitches there. 1 and 2. Now, if you're working size 3, then at the beginning of your sleeve cap, at the beginning of the row, in between your first stitch of this previous row and the beginning of the round, you should have 0 stitches right here. And on this end, you should only have a 1 stitch. So when we're going to slip stitch on the next stitches, you're only going to do 1 if you're doing size 3. But if you're doing any of the other sizes, then you're going to again skip that stitch that's been used. You don't want to use that one again, and go on to the next empty one and slip 1 and 2 stitches. Okay, now again, if you've done size 3, then you should only be slipping 1 stitch, and then that would leave you to the end of the setup round, which means that you need to skip now to the end of cap round. But since I'm doing size 5, then I will simply turn my work and continue. And we're going to repeat the same thing. I'm skipping the 2 slip stitches right there, and I'm going to make single crochet on that next single crochet. I'm going to place a marker so that I can identify it later on a bit easier. And then continue all the way to my end of the row, and then I will slip 2 on this side, and I will continue doing that over and over again until I have 0 stitches. So I'll continue doing that, and then I'll show you what it looks like when I only have 1 stitch on one side and 0 stitches on both sides. Okay. Okay, I am at the end of my round and I have only 2 empty stitches because this one, you can see there that there is a slip stitch that was worked on it. So this one is not empty. So I'm going to go to the next empty stitch. 1 and 2. Okay. And now I don't have any empty stitches between the end of the row and the join of the setup round. So there are 0 stitches. And then I turn, skip those slip stitches just like before, and work my right side row with an increase at the beginning and continue. And I'm going to place my marker again just so that I don't lose that stitch. Okay, now I only have 1 empty stitch between the end of my row and the join of the setup round, so I will only slip stitch 1. And then I will turn. And that's the end of all of my sleeve cap rows. As you can see, I've kind of joined in these rows together, so my sleeve looks nice and flat now with my body. So now for the end of cap round, you're going to turn your work and then chain 1 to start working on the wrong side of your work. And all you're going to do is simply work on each one of the stitches all the way to the end of the row on the other side. Now, if you are making a size 6, 7, 8, or 9, in between here, you will have your underarm stitches. You'll have a wider opening. Well, since I'm making size 5, I have my join of round there, and I just have those last two stitches where I've worked a slip stitch into. So those are U stitches. They just look empty because all they've had done is a slip stitch. So don't worry about that. Okay, now that I am at the end of my row, I will single crochet right there, and then I can slip stitch and join the round onto the first stitch of the round, which is this one. Now, if I do that, there's a little bit of an opening here that I don't love. So what you can do is use the end of your yarn to shut that close, or you could also, instead of that last stitch, you can make a single crochet 2 together right there onto these middle stitches, just to kind of close that gap a little bit more. And then a slip stitch and join the round. Okay, and then that gap is a lot more closed. If you're working sizes 6, 7, 8, and 9, the beginning of your end of cap round starts in the middle of your underarm. So what you're going to do is attach your yarn right to the middle of the underarm, and then you're going to work all the way around your sleeve until the middle of the underarm again, and join the round there. And just like I did now with a slip single crochet 2 together at the end of my round, what you could do whenever you have some gaps is work another single crochet 2 together, or simply close whatever gaps you have using any ends that you have loose there. So this is for working a short sleeve, right? So you're going to keep going in rounds, turning at the end of every round until you're ready for your cuff. So it's about 5 centimeters that you want to work your sleeve, or until you are ready to work your cuff. However, if you are working a long sleeve, the sleeve cap looks slightly different because you are using double crochet rows. So I'm going to show you now how to do the sleeve cap for a long sleeve pullover. The long sleeves start exactly the same as the short sleeves with our setup around. So I have my setup round worked here, and I used a 4mm hook for that one because it's worked with single crochet. And then I have my markers, and because I'm working size 5, I have 9 stitches, including my mark stitch from the center of my round, and then the same on the other side. Now, according to the instructions, it says to use a 3.5 millimeter hook. That's because you're going to be working on double crochets instead of single crochets. So whatever it is that meets the gauge for a double crochet on the sleeve, that's what you should be using, because remember that gauge is affected by your own tension or by the yarn you're using or the hook you're using. So make sure you adapt that. So I'm going to attach yarn to one stitch before the marker on the right side. So it's this one right here. And I'm going to remove the marker now. I used to have 9 stitches. Now I will have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 before before my marker. Okay. And then I'm going to attach my yarn there by pulling through, and I'm going to chain 1. I like to tighten that first chain, and I'm going to skip the stitch where the yarn was attached and the next one, which is where you used to have the marker, and then I'm going to work 2 double crochets on the next stitch. So that is an 1 increase, 1 and 2. Okay, and then I'm going to double crochet until 1 stitch before the next marker. So now I am almost at the end, and I have double crocheted until 1 stitch before my marker. Now I'm going to work 2 double crochets in that last stitch. Okay, and then I'm going to skip the mark stitch and remove the marker and slip stitch in the next 3 stitches. So I've skipped that one, and then 1, see, 2, and 3. If you are doing size 3, at this point you're only going to have 2 stitches to skip, and you will have 0 stitches left over. So it's important that you keep track of how many stitches you have left over here. I should have 5 for a size 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There you go. And then I'm going to turn my work. Now for my size, I'm going to skip those slip stitches on the body, and I'm going to do 2 stitches on the first stitch of the row, which in this case is this one. If you think it's going to be difficult for you to find the first stitch or the last stitch of the row, I recommend placing a marker on that very first stitch of the row and leaving it there so that when you get to the end, you can find it again. And after my increase, I will double crochet until the last stitch on the other side of the sleeve opening and do 1 more increase. This is it. Yeah, this is my last stitch. I'm going to work 2 stitches in the last stitch of the row. And then just like I did before, I am going to skip the next unworked stitch of the setup row. So I'm not talking about this one that is been used already. So that one had a slip stitch on it, right? So I'm going to skip the next one, and then I'm going to slip stitch in the next 3 stitches. And again, keeping track of how many stitches I have left here. So I have 1, 2, 3 unworked stitches between my join and the last worked stitch. So keep track of those to help you make sure that you have the right amount of worked stitches. And then turn. Again, we're going to do an increase at the beginning and an increase at the end on the other side. So 2 double crochets in the first stitch. And just to make sure that you are working in the right place, remember to place a marker there. And continue double crochet until the end of the row. If you are working size 3 at this point, your row will look different because you will have run out of stitches in here, but it will look the same later on when there are 0 stitches right here. So keep watching so that you know how to work that row in case you have any questions. So just like before, I'm going to do an increase in that last stitch of the row. Remove my marker. 1 and 2. And then I'm going to skip the next unworked stitch of this setup row. So remember, this one has already been worked on because there's a slip stitch there. So I'm going to skip the next one and then slip stitch in the next 3. 1, 2, 3. So all sizes will be doing the same thing, except when you don't have enough stitches to slip stitch, then you just do what you can. So you either will have to slip stitch 2 or 1, depending. And now I only have 1 stitch left over, so I'm going to
in that last stitch of the row,
and then do the same thing as before. Increase on the first stitch, now if you remember, at this point I only have 3 unworked stitches, so I'm going to skip the first one again, and then I'm only going to slip stitch in the next 2. Again, depending on your size, you will eventually get to this point, maybe here, maybe later on, or maybe you already got to this point. But eventually you're going to be working on all of these unworked stitches from the setup row. So now that I've done the last 2 stitches, where's my marker? I'm going to do my last row of my sleeve cap. So I'm going to turn and just like before, work 2 stitches in the first stitch, and then double crochet until the last stitch where I will be doing another increase. Now that I've done the increase at the end of the row as well, I only have 1 more stitch that has been unused on my setup row, so I will slip stitch in that one, and that finishes my cap, my sleeve cap. And then from here, I'm going to go to my end of cap around. So everyone at some point, all the sizes will eventually get to this point where you don't have any more stitches between the beginning of your setup round and the end of your setup round and the sleeve cap. However, for sizes 6, 7, 8, and 9, you will be having here an opening of your underarm stitches that are separating these 2 beginning and end of the round on the sleeve cap. So if you are working 6, 7, 8, or 9, here you're going to fasten enough, and then you're going to attach your yarn at the middle of your underarm, and then you're going to work the last round from the middle of your underarm. However, since I am working size 5, I'm going to continue doing it from here. So all I'm going to do is a chain 2. This is my turning chain, so it doesn't count like my like a stitch. I like to tighten that very first chain to make it not so long. And then I'm going to turn and double crochet all the way around. Now that I've gone all the way around, I'm simply going to join the round with a slip stitch. However, when I do that, you can see that there's quite a big opening here. So I can do 2 things. I can use the unworked tail from the beginning, from the end of my setup round to close this gap. Or what I can do instead is work a double crochet 2 together to close the gap like this. So 1 and 2. And then when I join the round, that gap is a lot smaller. And yes, there's still a little bit of a gap, but that's something that I can easily close with this tail over here or with any other tails that I have. All right, and from now on, I'm going to be working in the round. So here is my sleeve cap for my long sleeve. Now, remember, if you are working size 6, 7, 8, and 9, the end of cap round will look different, but the join will be exactly the same in the middle of your underarm. However, you might need to make double crochets together when you do that little step between the underarm and the cap rows that you just finished before this. But now that you are here, all sizes from size 1 all the way till 9 will look similar to this, because sizes 1 and 2 will already have a straight line here, right? So this is for sizes that needed that extra bit of underarm shaping. And now that we are all at the same level, you're going to continue working in rounds, turning at the end of every round until your sleeve is ready to do shaping. So as you can see, this sleeve is finished, and then your cuff, and that's it.